So, continuing on from our last discussion, I want to say a little bit more about exploration and why grind violates game design. So, um, at the end of the last video, we kind of covered here that exploration is after you've chosen your strategy or having access to customization of strategy, you can go out into the world and address the challenges that you face. And you do this to achieve goal states. And you can have nested goal states. We call these victory conditions because they're conflicting with an opposition. And so, But we didn't talk very much about the negatives because it seems like, there's a lot of design examples out there of things that treat resources, I think maybe the word is too literally. Like when you look at World of Warcraft, you can run around the world and actually find literal ore deposits or little herbs that you can collect and use in crafting. On the surface, this sounds reasonable. This sounds like it's exploration. Maybe even the crafting aspect sounds fun because, there's customization there. It's like it seems like you can build your own stuff. Now, obviously that's not true. There's a whole lot of other caveats that come with the crafting system in WoW that we won't talk about here. But I guess honing in on the grind aspect of that. So it seems like what you're doing is just, well, no, not that it seems. It seems like you're doing something productive, but you're not. You're just wasting time. And the effectiveness of crafting in World of Warcraft, to varying extents, depending on the patch, I guess, kind of highlights this, and also that it's very much a secondary thing. And the way that it's done, it is meant to waste time. And there's even tools that people have made that are very common. It's almost like you can't play WoW without these tools that make things like that easier. Those aren't part of the natural game. It's weird. But I'm going to highlight the issue here is that these things lack competition. And it seems like there is competition in World of Warcraft. There's a lot of competition. But there isn't here. And we won't get into the rest of that because we're just talking about this now, and World of Warcraft is a very, very big discussion. But in short, no, it is not a game. It's very terrible in design. I hate all the things on rails. That's the long and short of it. But so it's so grinding is just time wasting. It's doing something because the game says you need to do this for a certain amount of time before we'll allow you to succeed, before we'll allow you to move forward. It doesn't require any strategy. There isn't really a point to it. It is just a matter of simulation. The game is trying to simulate something for you. Of course, again, it's not a game, but we're all caught up in these conventions of speech, so I'll keep misspeaking just as much as everybody else. But getting back to the point, it's a matter of missing opportunity in game design. It's a mistake every single time, no matter what the game is, to implement instances of grinding. And here's the solution. Again, it's competition. What you need to do is make things that you're wanting to, like the player to be able to engage in, that currently you're designing as grinding. to instead view that from the competition standpoint. So let me give some examples here. So it's weird, but in an MMO, I would not have any kind of mineable resources. I would not have anything that you could just, search around and find randomly, because let me clarify. Something non-cosmetic, something that actually has game value for game mechanics, because all that does is waste players' time. In fact, I don't even know if I would have any items that were mechanically oriented in an MMO. Based on my own personal designs and my own instincts here with the theorem, that seems like a recipe for disaster. And you can look at every single MMO that has ever been, and all of them are from the beginning. If you just analyzed it and looked at it objectively, you could see they were all built to fail. World of Warcraft has never been a vehicle of agency for its players. It's never been a game. It has always been an extra job that you pay to do, with maybe the benefit of pretty pictures on a screen and the illusion that you have agency. I'm not sure it's worth the price. But what I think, so if I were to design an MMO, what I would do is give players all of the stats on their own to modulate fully. Let them customize everything more like, Asheron's Call. Like when you're building your character in Asheron's Call, you can, watch old videos of this, watch recaps, and check out some, there's like the Death of a Game video by, I forget the channel, but you can look up the Death of a Game for Asheron's Call. Great video. You can fully customize your character in, like, to the extent that you can actually choose your individual stat numbers from the full pool of points that you have. And there's also the other features in Asheron's Call that there's no classes. Everything is a skill that you customize. So you choose the exact build of your character. Now, the way Asheron's Call was built, there's some other problems that they ran into, but that on the surface is a very, very good design. And that's a lot of things that classes create a lot of problems. It's basically taking choice away from the player. It's removing customization of strategy. And in some cases, you end up just design-wise running yourself into instances of, solvability. And that's the problem that World of Warcraft constantly runs into with solvability and balance. And then of course the fact that because there's so much volatility in those things, because it's not built correctly, and because there's so much money in it, it just becomes a secondary market for, nefarious people to exploit. It just creates a whole bunch of other problems when you don't design a game right. So, coming back to exploration. So, have characters that can really just, like, you start off the game, you build your individual stats, you actually choose your stats, and it allows you to fully customize your, sort of like your own custom class. And unlike Asheron's Call, it's not solvable, because one of the problems in Asheron's Call was the way the numbers worked out. There were actually optimized builds for certain things, and if you didn't do that, because it was very PvP oriented, you would often get slaughtered if you didn't optimize in what's called power game. So that's a balance issue. That's a math issue. That's not necessarily a design fault from a systematic standpoint. It's just a math error. Although you could have other problems in the way that you designed a system, but I think that for there it was really just um, it was too monolithic, too complicated of a system for them to easily balance. But the other thing too here, I want to mention because I keep coming back to the stats thing. So when you're designing a system for players to build characters in, um, it's you don't have to get complicated with it. You can have stats that range from 1 to 10, but you can also have stats that range from not in maybe not in the same game, but or depending. But I mean, like for your basic stats, for a different game, you could have them range from 1 to 100. And the things that you want to avoid in designing those kind of systems are giving players choices that don't matter. But when you give them something that's got a wider range to it, that gives them more customization. That gives people more agency, that allows things to be more dynamic. Um, and then I guess the other final thing too, just on that point, is that uh, as sort of a shorthand rule that game designers can use, you want to avoid doing things like Pokemon types, like you want to avoid type damage and um, like the rock paper scissors table of specializations that trump one another. You want to avoid that in single player games because that's only viable in multiplayer competition. So if you're doing a single player game, you want to have everything be generic damage. You can have things like fireballs or whatever, but you don't want to have um, like damage and protection types. Um, you can get around this in something like Final Fantasy where you're controlling a whole team of characters, or like in Pokemon where you have a whole team of Pokemon where you can vary your loadout. That is good design. You can customize it. Um, so things like that are good. But now let's get back to the exploration point. So um, you create your own customized character, and exploration in a game is really going out and applying your strategy to solve your goals. And these goals are competition based. So um, instead of making it so players have to wander around and waste time finding a resource or waste time battling menial creatures to gain levels, make those things meaningful. So like in an MMO, it would be interesting if there were um, reputation or like faction variables that would be affected depending on the monsters that you were attacking. And that whenever you were attacking those monsters, you were engaging in that competition. Even without having to like go through the trouble of like selecting all of those things, and like you could just choose your moves in that higher level competition just by which monsters you attack, or where you fight. Um, and the NPCs, you can see them playing out the effects of what the players are choosing to help with. And that can affect the like monster demographics in certain areas. You could make that dynamic. Um, and so I guess that's easier to do for monsters. I don't even know how you would do things like collecting herbs or those kinds of things out in the wild. I really would try to avoid that. But what I would do is something like the way that Pokemon does the acorn trees. So those are very interesting. I don't like the way that Pokemon does it, but especially because they kind of make all of the Pokeballs meaningless. And really, I mean, well, no, I guess we won't get into that. But so it it's really cool if you have in kind of, like a simple Game Boy game, if you had a garden that you could have a certain number of trees, like if you combine Animal Crossing with Pokemon, where you could actually choose which trees to cultivate, and that gave you certain things, certain advantages, certain builds that you could, customize your strategy with. And when you battled other players, you saw the effects of their customization, and it would run deeper than just the Pokemon that they had. It would also be how they were playing their game. And that's a way more interesting fight because you don't know what to expect. You do have more hidden information. That's really cool. Um, but getting back to basic competition and how to look at things. So I think there's an instinct when you're designing like an MMO and you have a solo character who's approaching something and they don't have other party members. So they need to find a way to get through an area that has their counter, like monsters that they have trouble with. It seems like what you would want to do is send them on a grinding quest to go gather materials to build something to help them get through, or make potions to help them heal as they were going through whatever. Um, what that is instead doing again is just wasting a player's time. It's sort of moving the goalpost back, but what you should be doing is giving them just the competition. So in an MMO, the solution is that player might need to either find a party member, or maybe they're just not high level enough. But in a single player game, you really can't have that. You can't make something that's too hard for the player to do, unless there's a reason for that. But they're usually, I mean, at a most basic level, that would be a bad design. That would be like if there was an enemy that Mario couldn't defeat. So, I mean, it's maybe it's tautological, maybe it's too obvious to point that out. Like, I'm not saying anything profound here, but just for the sake of completeness, you just wouldn't do that. But the the point that needs to be made there is how to view that as a competition. So um, it's not that the player needs to get something, because like I said in the other video, and I kind of regretted saying this right after, is that you should have whatever they need in the town. So as I was kind of thinking about that, I was like, well, maybe like in a single player thing, but in my MMO example, um, everything kind of, again, uses the same stat. So everything should be in relation to each other. You really, unless you had specialized type damage, which maybe, I mean, in an MMO you definitely could do, but I would avoid. Um, I think that's better for like party battle games, more like Super Smash Bros. Or although fighting games are more sports, if you could make a real game that way, make a real fighting game, I mean, um, or one-on-one battles like Pokemon. Smaller scale battles work better with type damage, but I mean, I guess you could still have something like, if you were a really tanky character and there was something that was just, maybe it was another very tanky opponent that, was just doing the same thing as you, it was just going to be a slog fest. I don't know, maybe you would just avoid that dungeon because it's not like it's taking agency away from you. I don't know if that's bad design. It's not like you have to, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that is bad design because it would just be filling up one location with too much of one monster. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too granular here, but the point is you don't want to make them go off and have to do something else because the point is they want to do that competition. So what you need to do is give them a way to approach it. So if there's a castle, it's not like there shouldn't be, or it's not like there should be opponents that are too hard to get through. It's that it should be fun for the player to figure out how to get through it using their strategy. So, and again, this is without giving enemies routines. You don't want to be giving enemies routines. You want to have them with goals. So they're going to be adapting or doing things based on whatever the player is doing. And by the way, in the last video, I said it was different depending on the player, but it's not even, it's like, it's better than that. It's depending on what the player is doing each time. So truly dynamic, both at the small scale and at the big scale for kind of like your overarching goals, which I guess in things like MMOs could be, faction territories, contested territories, realm versus realm fights. I don't know, things like that. But large scale tournaments. I know you can have. There's a lot of things, but that's more a future video. I really just wanted to say as much more as I could about exploration. And the last thing that I wanted to really focus on is viewing the actual terrain, because I keep saying this and I feel like I didn't really drive the point home last video. Literally everything in a game that the player can interact with is a limited resource in the competition. At all times, they need to be engaged in a competition. So don't have them go off and do something that's grinding because they're not engaged in the competition. They're having to waste time because you, as the game designer, said they needed to waste time before they could do the competition. So, wow, I just got like a whole little rant out. I just completely lost my train of thought there. But focusing. Okay, so the last thing, bring it back to the competition. And wait, hold on, let me pause here. Okay, so the last thing here that I wanted to focus on is thinking of everything in the game. Everything in the game is a limited resource. At all times, they need to be engaged in the competition. At all times, players need to be engaged in a competition. So it doesn't need to be it doesn't mean that action always needs to be happening. It means that everything they're doing has to be relevant. And grinding isn't relevant. Grinding isn't relevant to a competition. It's just raising their stat. The other thing too is the difference between mechanic items and cosmetic items. So it's better to have cosmetic items because it allows you to avoid grinding. You don't make players grind to get anything. You don't have to put special cosmetic items as a random drop. Make it the goal of a dungeon. Make it a specific guaranteed boss drop. That's much better. You can have random things. You can have random surprises. But don't, don't hide them in the monster. Maybe if they get that special item, just put it in the character's inventory. Or, if there's drop it on the ground and, make sure that if they got the kill or they're in a party, that other people can't take, make sure those guardrails are in place. Those are all things that are important too. But to the mechanic cosmetic difference here and avoiding grind, this makes it so you're not even thinking about those things. And you're making sure that all of the customization of strategy is something the player already has access to. You can have leveling, you can have more powerful characters. That's fine. But you don't want to make it so the game is solvable or becomes pay to win, or just alienates players that way. And gosh, well, there's just so much more to talk about with MMOs, and the other big thing too that we haven't talked about yet, except for well, there was that video I did, but I still want to talk more about it later. Is death mechanics, and that's a big topic for MMOs. So we're definitely getting through the long video here, so we're gonna stop and call it the end of the discussion. We'll continue on with other things later. Thanks for listening, and hope you learned something.